We can move. That's fine.
Okay. All right. Cool. So, thank you and welcome to the Poetry Knives, the Paper
Thank
Knives
you.
Poetry. Yeah. Thank you, Eduardo Claudio, for coming on to the Paper Knives Poetry Podcast. For those of
Thank
you
you for
tuning
having me
in,
here.
Eduardo Claudio serves as the 209 Poets admin. He's the Sligo poet and a community artist and space holder, a Stockton, California poet and community artist member. He has written and shared his work at various Stockton area open mics, supporting the 209 art and writing scene. As a part of a fellowship with Tuleberg Press, he's now bringing his poems and his poetry to, I believe, to Sligo, Ireland, and he's been a paid performing artist for the Words Outspoken Virtue Summit. For those of you who are tuning in, I met Eduardo through the Grassroots Open Mic hosted by Family Power Music, and after hearing his work and hearing about what he's got going on with Tuleberg Press, I wanted to get to know him a little bit better, and so I asked him to come on the Paper Knives Poetry Podcast. Eduardo, would you want to kick things off with a poem just so we can set the tone, and you can I want to say bless the mic, even though we don't really have a mic in the traditional sense.
It's fine. Is it fine if I read like the first poem I've ever written?
Yeah, that would be great. That's an amazing way to start off this episode.
Okay. All right. It's a short one, but here it goes. It's not titled, so. If all the flowers on the earth died, and all the water that the earth carried dried, if the mountains that we always see in the background crumbled, and the architecture in which love is made tumbled, if the love that you had for me faded away, and the memories we created went astray, if the nights spent together naked under the moon, on sweating skin embracing each other in places made for love, making passionate memories, and the days spent with the sun shining on your beautiful face, in flower picking fields by the mountainside, our love for each other growing stronger. Yeah, that's it.
What prompted you to write this poem? I mean, so you had said earlier before we started that you had begun writing about 10 months ago, and this is the first poem that you've ever written. So what was it that prompted you to start writing and to write this?
So around the time it was a friend who introduced me to poetry, and before that I never really read poetry. I didn't really understand much about it. But like based on what she was writing, like I was kind of got a bit of a understanding of it, and then I was writing this as a love memory, I guess, of and like things that were lost and what was gained from it, I guess, is what the poetry was about.
And so what has kept you in the game for the last 10 months? I mean, I know one thing that you mentioned in your bio is being involved in area open mics. I'm wondering, like, what else, or what in addition to that, or what about that has kept you fueled?
So whenever I write poetry, for me it's very exciting. It's a release of like my emotions, and it's something that meditation for me in a way, because when I started writing poetry, I was like writing out the things that I was feeling, and it was kind of messy at first, but over time I was trying to figure myself out, and through these writings I was like able to build a map for myself, just mapping myself in my life and where I was at. Yeah, that's what I can say for that.
Yeah, that helps. Did you grow up in the Stockton area?
I did.
And how would you describe maybe what you knew about the poetry and art scene before you really got involved in it versus what you understand about it or what you're experiencing about it now that you've really gotten integrated to it?
I was an actor in high school. Was in a few plays by like William Shakespeare. As You Like It, and I don't think that was by one, but As You Like It and The Crucible, that wasn't. But that was the extent of like what I knew about art. I didn't know there was like a community of artists here in Stockton until even when I started writing poetry, I wasn't aware of it. But I think about 4 months into writing poetry, I was told about open mics, and I decided to give it a go. And it's pretty nerve-wracking at first, being on stage and talking to people. You know, you can feel yourself like very nervous, and it's very nerve-wracking. You just feel your whole body shaking as you're going through it. But after a while, you get more used to it. But I didn't know nothing about it, and then I started like going to open mics every month, and then people started to know more and more about me, and then what is it called? I did a couple of outreach, and then some people outreach to me, like you. And for the 209 Poets page, since I'm administrator for it, one of my friends, she reached out to me, and she was like, she wanted me to be in it because she was the previous Sligo poet. She was the one who went to Ireland the last year, and then I'm her predecessor, I guess, afterwards. And she's been really helpful, and I gotta appreciate her for that.
So what can you tell me a little bit more about what the 209 Poets, you mentioned the 209 Poets page is.
Right.
Talk about that a bit?
So it's a social media page. It's a way for poets in the community to be able to share their content, for us to also give opportunity. What we're trying to do is what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give people opportunity, as in looking for scholarships and fellowships, throughout, like wherever I can find it online, and then sharing it so that people will have an opportunity to at least do something outside of just here in Stockton.
So what's the significance of 209?
It's for the Stockton poets, or the 209 poets, who don't really have a voice.
Is 209 the area code out there?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, all right, that makes sense then. I'm wondering if you could read another poem for us, maybe something a little bit more recent.
A little bit more recently?
Yeah.
I could read the poem that I've just been working on right now. I'm one sentence short, if that's fine with you.
Yeah, that's totally fine. And then afterwards we can talk a little bit about the process that you go through when you write. So this is a poem in progress.
Yeah, it's titled Lost. What are words but confessions of the soul? Persistent thoughts we grasp onto, expressing them in pages. Something sacred to the writer's eye, yet others revel in revelations. Of quotes we reprise to the end like oaths by which we swear. What is art but an illustration of the mind and body? A canvas we wake up to every day where our emotions are conveyed. Of colorful shades we paint the world as we go about our day. Life will get messy, but as we look back, we'll see our life's depiction in such beauty. What is a dance but of steps, twists, and turns made throughout life? Of rhythms we follow through as we move our body in accord. The melody of time played all through humankind as we groove along. Some alone, others with the group, but will always fall in open arms. What of hopes and dreams radiating through the earth without falter? Of wishes made in silence as one walks aimlessly under starry nights. Aspirations sparked from our imagination becoming our destination. Through our ambition will shine as bright as stars to those around. What of struggles we tend to push away when it was in our mind all day? Inconveniences we come across, we to overcome, to move on forward. Times of full we're falling through the ground with no end in sight. My dear, if ever you find yourself astray without a trace, look to the future, past, and those around where you'll see the rhythms of the earth. Look towards the heavens, there you'll grasp a shooting star amongst bright lights. Look at life in all its glories. Here you will understand the fruit of your labor.
So I got I gotta pause for a second. I mean, first of all, let me just say, I think, right, to start off with such a bold claim, right, to ask this question, what are words but confessions of the soul? You set up the pattern that you follow in the poem really nicely, but I think you also set up the gravity and the scope of everything that follows really nicely. So I want to say kudos to that.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed it. I'm curious why you had said that before you started reading, that you felt like you needed another sentence on the end of this. I'm assuming you meant on the end of it, but can you talk a little bit about why it is that you feel like you need another sentence in there?
Well, no, because usually I follow each stanza with 4 lines, and one of them is just missing one more line, which I want to include into it, which I haven't finished yet.
So it's just a sense of balance. You've got an idea of a linear form in your mind that you want to.
Yeah.
So that leads me to my next question, which is how do poems start and end for you? How do you typically begin, or how does the notion for a poem come to you? And how do you know when it's done?
It is kind of difficult to begin a poem because there's a lot of like thoughts that go on my mind, and usually I try to write them down on my phone too, or type it in. But it's not finalized until I've written something in my journal, and that's when I've like written the poem. But I think when something speaks to me is when I start writing it down and delving more into it. I do write sometimes, like there are people who I like to write to, and or emotions that I feel that I'd like to write about. I think just writing about life is something that I enjoy doing. And the process is just of like my experiences of everything that's happened, and how I take in everything and write it out.
So when you are writing things in your, let's say I'm assuming on your notes app in your phone, or just jotting down thoughts, are those like each one the start of a different kind of poem, or do you ever like collage the different observations that you put down together into a new piece?
No, I never try to like collage all the thoughts into one. I try to make anything I write down into its own thing, and if I see something, I try to go more into it, like type it out, and then if I see there's, sorry.
No, I was just going to say that it sounds like you get an idea, and then for you it's about going deeper into that idea, or you get an insight, and then you go deeper into that insight.
Because I'll be honest with you, I have a lot of like notes that I haven't written out in my poetry, so there are some things that I've left out, but I want to, because I know sometimes in my journal as well, there are like some poetries that I haven't finished, and I'm probably like maybe a few sentences in, or maybe like half a page in, but I don't really feel like I'm done with it. I feel like there's still more to it that I can add.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense, particularly considering that you are approaching it as a poet of depth, right? Are they typically ideas that you're writing down, or are they lines in particular? Because I know for some poets it's about you get a sound in your ear, and then you got to keep working out that sound until it kind of resolves itself the way that a song would. And some poets are more like, I've got an idea, and now I've got to figure out how to convey that idea with the poem that I'm writing. Does one or the other of those seem to be more the way that you operate?
It's more of a line. I write a line, and then I delve into it more if I see something, if I see a pattern, or if something comes
up. You mentioned in your bio being a space holder. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that means or what that looks like, and how that relates to your work as a writer, a poet, and an artist.
Well, I do have a goal of mine, or an ambition, I guess, even though I'm starting small. I do want to, like, what would you say? I would like to inspire others in their writings. I've had quite a few people come up to me and they shared their words with me. And, I've really appreciated that. And I would like to hear more of that. I would like to see more people writing their thoughts out, because I usually see people, saying that they used to write on their journals, but then they stopped. And I always ask, why, and, then life gets in the way is what they say, duties and all. But it'd be nice, for people to start writing their own thoughts, or writing something at least. It doesn't have to be something to share, but it can be writing for themselves. But because this is the way I started out, is by writing to myself, and it's really helped me through all this, this last couple of years, falling in hard times.
Do you find yourself holding space, or did you find yourself holding space in other ways prior to starting writing, or did you discover this space holding predominantly through poetry?
No, I had always been a space provider. I'd always been someone that had liked to help others. Was always volunteering or helping someone in need in one way or another.
And so poetry is just sort of another way to do that, or another avenue to help other people open up in emotional, intellectual, imaginative ways. I'd like to go to another poem, if you don't mind.
Okay. Well, is there anything you have in mind, or you don't mind if I read something?
No, at this point it's dealer's choice, man.
All right. I do want to write or read about where I was at first in my mindset. So it does kind of, it's not dark, but it is I guess sad in a way.
Sure.
To see someone in such nature, but it's what I was feeling at the time. And this one is called Berserk. You try to fall onto arm's embrace, but the only ones you find are yours alone. A man who perceives loneliness dives into the deepest depths of his darkness. Giving away your humanity, your own virtue do you disown. Laying destruction everywhere you go Laying destructions everywhere you go, look back at life's path and get a sense of starkness. Realizing the many relationships that were wrecked, you no longer know who you are. Images that you constantly replay in your head, of hearts shattered and eyes betrayed. Sorry if it's an old poem, so I haven't written or read it much. Heart weakened by your guilt over time and always surrounded by suffocating air, constantly trying to cope with your past, but the thought of a relationship, are you afraid? Deeper and deeper do you dig your hole until your lights disappear, cutting contact with the world and with those around, or with those who want you around. You don't see how much you miss company until you're bounded by despair. Looking for an answer, all you get is emptiness abound. In the depths of your darkness, you find false comfort. You feed into its belief and into contorted thoughts. In return, your boundless despair do you export. It is an endless cycle with forgiveness bounded by tight knots. You try and get away from darkness, but in your heart, anger has resided. Blinded by its wrath, you've lost a sense of who you once were. The love and consideration for others you once held has subsided. Everyday life, its beauty, travels, and people have all become a blur. Feigning feelings because you've forgotten how to express emotions. But the one emotion you haven't forgotten throughout this whole course is hatred. Your hatred shown on your bruised hands and holes in the wall, leaving you broken. The temple you built has crumbled. under your heart, leaving behind nothing sacred.
Huh. So I want to kind of use this as a pivot point to another question. It's pretty clear in that poem how the loss of positive emotion or the loss of positive sentiment, and I would say also the narrator finding themselves unable to engage in the kind of helpful activities that they had or helpful spirit that they had previously is really detrimental to them. That seems to me to connect really well with, at least on the surface, with what's referenced in your bio as being a words outspoken virtue summit performer. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about this idea of virtue or the idea of service, and I mean what the Words Outspoken Virtue Summit was, and kind of what your role in participating there consisted of.
Well, my basic understanding of virtue is aiding others is what I can put it up to. Helping others in any way possible if they're falling on the hard times, just the way I was. And the community virtue was, how'd you put it? Spent some time, so.
Do you remember when it was that the event was hosted?
Sorry?
Do you remember when it was that the event was hosted?
I think September. It was hosted at my college, Delta College, and it was a place where people performed on stage, but a lot of readings were done as well, and it was more of like the kind of reading that they wanted from us were those about like service, or if ever sometimes you were like in hard times and you were trying to get out, like what was there to help you, or like and provide that in a writing, something we can share. And I do have something I wrote that I shared with the whole community, and a lot of people really enjoyed it.
Do you have that with you?
Yeah, I have it right here.
Would you mind pulling it up and giving it a read?
Yeah. Just gotta remember where I wrote it at.
Yeah, take your time.
But they do it every year, and there's also a Zoom or a Zoom place you can look it up as well.
I saw a Facebook page, and I don't know if it was I think it was the same one because Tuleberg Press was listed as a co-sponsor. It was back in 2020 though, so I didn't know if this is something that had taken place like way back. I say way back, 2 years ago. I didn't know if this was something that had taken place, but it sounds like it's an ongoing event, and that there was one in September, but maybe the social media presence for one reason or another is not as active as the actual organizing of the events are.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not too caught up on that then. But I believe Tuleberg and Words Outspoken are affiliated because there are a few associates that know each other there.
Sure.
So this one is titled Man. The duality of man to choose between two paths, whether to destroy everything in his way until his dying breath, or to find meaning in love, bringing life to those around. For him to seek but never find love would be his demise. To only see hatred to those around would lead to his downfall. But to try and love the world will one only build a facade for himself. In trying to find meaning in everything, one's life will become meaningless. And what is a man without his principles or reason? If his life is steeped in the uncertain, devoid of conviction, he will be tested against his wills, or against his wits, and will either prevail or succumb. Prevailing against his misfortune, will he find strength needed to carry on? But succumbing to his inclination, will one only revel in misery? And what good can sprout from a seed if malice is all it's ever given? What good can come from a relationship if it's only built on self-interest? How can one know himself if with others he is disingenuous? Throughout his life, he will have to make decisions that will decide the nature of his course. They will either bring fruition to that which is inconceivable, or will slowly wither away into the past now irretrievable. He'll make mistakes along the way that in his mind will find regrettable. But if he strives to be a virtuous human, he will find himself redeemable. For it is impossible for a man to live prosperously if in his heart he can't find tranquility. Though man can never know tranquility if he only ever surrounds himself in grief. He must learn to move on from troubled times or forever hold his peace. Hope will lie at every step of his path, and he will come to know this. But if he moves on forward without faith, he will only come to know despair. His travels will be of solitude as he discovers prophecies meant for his soul. Eventually, he will find his place of belonging where he will thrive. In a life that was once consumed by hatred, he will come to know love, and with it, prosperity.
One of the things I really appreciate about, not all of your poems do this, but I appreciate this about the poems that do, is that when you decide to rely on rhyme, the rhyme is not obvious, and it's not, even though in most cases it is an identical rhyme, you're not bonking the reader over the head with like, hey, this rhymes. Listen to how it rhymes, which I think a lot of younger poets or poets who are first coming to writing tend to do. There's a reliance on rhyme to the extent that they force the meter, they force an expression that doesn't sound natural. And the thing I enjoy about your writing is the way that you're able to get these natural rhymes in there in ways that sound like, I'll say, comfortable speech. Right? They don't sound forced. Was that a piece that you wrote for the occasion, or was it one that you wrote that happened to fit?
It was one I wrote that happened to fit.
Yeah, it seems very much like you are a poet of social concern and a poet of concern for the well-being of others. Does that sound roughly accurate to you?
In a way, I think I was, because I was writing for myself when I was writing that. I was, in a way, trying to like help myself out through, troubled times. But in looking back, I can see that, others can also relate to it. And as I was writing, as I continued like writing my poetry, I was thinking to myself that people are going to relate in a way, because everyone has had a, everyone's had a life, and everyone has had their own experiences. And the thing about my poetry is I like writing stories when I write poetry. And because I think for me I think stories are very important for people, like how'd you say? Since the beginning of times, there's always been stories that have been told and passed down, and that's something that I'd always been thinking about. And so when I write these poetries, I have a story in mind. I have a beginning and I have an ending, and I have like something what I want to share with the reader when I write it out.
So you are currently the Sligo poet or Sligo Poetry Fellow for or with Tuleberg Press. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what I want to hear about is generally how you came to be in contact with Tuleberg Press, and then also how you got connected with this particular fellowship and what your involvement with Tuleberg looks like. So can you start off by just kind of telling me a little bit more about how you connected with Tuleberg Press?
Honestly, at first, they were just people I saw I didn't really know much about. But once I was in the poetry community, I saw them at one of the events that was being held, and that's where I got to know them a little bit more. And then, what is it called? And my friend, she's the other administrator for the 209 Poets. She was talking to me about the Sligo, or what is it called, the Tuleberg Press, and how she was also mentioning the Sligo Fellowship, and that's where I'd come to learn about that. And what did you say? I applied, and I think 2 weeks later, I applied in October, and then the funny thing is, I got the notification that I was going to Sligo the week of my birthday. So it was a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, what a present! What a present!
I know. And I started going to the Tuleberg Press, just visiting them, and I go there every once in a while. I'm actually going to go there today to talk to Paula, and it's just a chat about poetry. But I'm starting to go there more and more often. At first, they were just just strangers, but kind of associated with them a bit more and more as time goes on. And I'll be doing so, as we get closer and closer to the fellowship.
When is that actually going to be that you go to Ireland?
It won't be until late July, early August, in that time span.
And do you have any idea what you're going to be doing there yet?
I believe we're going to be learning about a poet, a famous Ireland poet. I forget his name, but it's going to be a 2-week course, I believe, studying about poetry.
Okay.
But it's also exploring like the area, the land, and sightseeing, like looking at everything.
Sure. It'll be interesting to see how that impacts your writing, how you become influenced by a kind of intensive study of this particular poet and this geography, to see what sorts of poems come out of that. I know when I heard Paula's work, she was very much a poet of place, who is very descriptive of the environment that the poem is taking place in. That doesn't seem to be a central concern of your work, but I wonder how finding yourself in a new environment will be. So I hope that I'll get a chance to have you back on and maybe get you to read some of the new work that comes out of that experience.
I do have a poetry describing my city that I'm going to be submitting to Stockton. This is, I guess, the closest I've come to like describing areas.
Okay. So this is an area that you see it as a viable poetic mode, but it's not one that you've been really, you haven't explored much, but you've got one here. Do you mind reading that?
Yeah, because I was born and raised here in Stockton, and so I've come to know it back and forth, from north to east and south and west. And I'd say this again, I'm not finished with it as well, but I have a good amount of it already out. And this one's titled The City of Life. Through rosebush gardens dancing in summer's light, ponds glistening with life, catching observing eyes, of strolls made every day, taking in nature's playful souls, a place where pets can sit about on green hills till tired paws, And in between it all lies a museum filled with relics of the past, such as Victory Park and Victorious May It Last. But of course, that's not all Stockton has to offer. Many parks lay throughout where one can play soccer, lively activities to be experienced out in the open fields of sports and recreation by the end, or sorry, of sports and recreation which by the end under a shaded tree will yield. Yet, here in these parks one can find love spread across in picnic blankets, foods and delicacies all in plenty for empty stomachs, hands held tight, enjoying sights of the world around, reaching content in each other's company on sunset hills. You'll find miracles laid out on stretched streets spanning miles, shops set about to look around in the grass to sprout of Stockton's past. And as one explores these palm tree roads, they'll find marvels through glass panels. Enjoy a meal with those around, letting serenity surround you. Car shows on these passing lanes, leaving one to gaze in awe. Spirits of all ages thriving on this Oton road. Take a dive into Pacific and discover the depths of its revelation. You'll find worlds unbeknown to those who seek without looking. A university bringing diversity in picturesque moments and those who share them. Its tower is standing tall, singing chimes every hour of the day. Brick buildings bearing ivy roots in its distinctive Gothic look. A realm separate from Stockton upon one's embark.
I definitely like what you've done so far.
Thank you.
It presents an appealing picture of Stockton that makes me want. I mean, I had already, after hearing Paula Shield read at this grassroots open mic hosted by Family Power, I had already wanted to come and visit Stockton, but only for to see the press and check that out. But now hearing your description of it sounds much more appealing. Is there one college or multiple universities that are in Stockton?
There's only one university here in Stockton. There's a Delta College, or actually, I think there's another university, Humphrey, but I don't know too much about that place.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
I was kind of, sorry?
No, go ahead.
I wanted to write this poem to give people an image of Stockton, and then for people to at least visit the places that I've described, or maybe have their own little tour. But
well, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure that there are references in there that, I mean, as somebody who's never been to Stockton, I can't get it as an inside reference. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's an appealing scene, but I would also suspect that if I knew Stockton, or if I was, reading the poem as I walked around Stockton, that I would get some of the inside references.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about what you're learning at Delta College and how you got hooked up there. What are you studying?
Well, I'm studying economics, which is not really anything related to poetry. I will be transferring coming fall, so I won't be in Stockton anymore.
Where are you looking at transferring to?
Maybe into UCs or some kind of CSU, but it's still all in the air still.
Okay. Do you want to keep the economics major?
Yeah, I do. So the problem I have though is that I was doing economics for a while, and then I started doing poetry, and now it's like my writing poetry has consumed up a lot of my time, and I had found myself moments when I was in school, when I was doing homework, where I was urgently resisting, writing poems because I just didn't want to. Well, I had to focus on studying, but I had tried to find a balance in everything, and it's kind of hard, because I'd consider myself, I guess, an avid writer, writing almost every day, or trying to anyways.
What was it that attracted you to economics? Why did you gravitate in that direction when you enrolled?
What do you put it? I guess I'm interested in the world around, in like I guess economic sense. I like to read books about history of different countries and how they fared throughout centuries and where they stand now. And that's a bit about, or from where I kind of want to do
Yeah.
economics.
Yeah, no, I mean it makes sense. So I think the trend, the trend, as far as I understand it, the trend in economics has been to look more behavioral economics, which is really a lot more related to psychology and individual, making generalizations about how populations of individuals make economic decisions for themselves and how those aggregate in the larger term. So people like Daniel Kahneman come to mind as prominent behavioral economists. But one of the areas that I think connected to what you're talking about that would be an interesting area of study, if you want to fuse the two, if you don't want to, make a switch or feel like you're, I don't know, being pulled in one direction or another, would twofold. One, from a microeconomic perspective, there's not been a lot of research done on the way that poetry small presses or larger. I mean, I don't know any poetry publisher that's like a large publisher. Poetry is generally not the larger arm of any publishing company when you consider various publishing companies. So if you were looking at a whole industry of poetry publication, it would be interesting to see what the trends in publishing are, and how, say spending or investment from different sectors affects poetry being written. And from a more historical economics perspective, it could be interesting to also look at the writing of poetry and circulation of poetry, both formally through some kind of publication, whether that's oral presentation in ancient times or written manuscript in the medieval period or after the advent of movable type, the printing press and the movable type. That obviously those technologies changed the way that poetry is distributed. But my question would be, how does the production and distribution of poetry wind up correlating with the distribution and production of other goods and services? Or how does it relate to the growth of other measures of civilizational well-being, right, or societal well-being? Does that make sense, what I mean by that?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I think
Oh, sorry, no,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, you can go ahead. Say what you're going to say.
No, I don't want to cut you off in the middle of the sentence, that's all.
I was just going to say, given what you've already talked about in terms of the way that poetry has served for you as a kind of freeing up or opening out of emotional exploration, right? And the way that you've seen it provide that sort of support for other people, and the way that you're interested in opening that up, it would be interesting to see whether there are larger. I mean, that's generally my experience as well, right? I started writing poetry when I was, I don't know, probably like 13 years old, filled with all of these, adolescent, preteen, or teenage kind of angst ideas, and very much connected to like wanting to be like Jim Morrison, basically, as I think a lot of young writers tend to be, gravitating toward a lot of those emotional outlets or the emotional expression. And so I wonder, given that is evident in poetry throughout history, I think you might find some interesting evidence about how that feature of poetry winds up impacting other areas of economic development. But anyway, you were saying.
Well, I was gonna say, because at first, I was thinking about keeping like my work separate from my hobbies, and that I'd considered just poetry as a hobby. But over time, I do kind of see myself leaning in like what you're talking about in a way. I just don't want to lose passion in writing poetry. Is my one concern, because I kind of want to, or I want to write poetry throughout my life, and I want to publish them and create a legacy of poems that I can leave behind.
Yeah, certainly making a
But
career
keeping
in
it, I
poetry.
don't know, because it'll probably, with the way I'm going with all these fellowships or with the fellowship and me trying to get into like expanding myself into other areas, that probably might not like be the case of just it become or just being a hobby.
Well, I definitely think that more and more there have been area or local poetry laureate positions that have opened up. I think increasingly there are opportunities for poets to get connected and work as other artists have in or with the nonprofit sector. And I think there's also an increasing evidence of writers and poets who are marketing themselves thanks to the opening up and leveling out of social networking through social media. I think while they're not achieving the high status of somebody like Billy Collins or Rod McEwen was a huge name in the 60s and 70s. Rupi Kaur is another much more prominent poet who started on Instagram, who's since gone on to sell incredibly well and appear in national media. So I think poetry has taken on, if not a larger public profile, it seems to me that there are more opportunities for poets to earn something approaching a middle-class living that wasn't available in earlier times when poets were really, if you were going to have a job, you were going to have a day job. Probably you were going to be, if you're not just working a day job and then writing poetry on the side, you're probably a university professor and teaching a load of classes and then, also writing your poetry on the side, but at least your publications, count toward tenure or something like that. That was sort of the route that I had initially wanted to go or thought that I should go in writing. But it sounds like you already are intuiting that if you start to, there's a tension, right? Either the job becomes so consuming or demanding of your time and energy that you don't have the time, energy, or inclination to keep doing this artistic activity that really feeds your inner life, right? And allows you to keep going, which is kind of a dead end. Like that, we should kind of see that as like, well, there's the end game. Like I won't get the thing that, right? If I start to lose out on the thing that makes life sustainable for me, then that option's really not an option. And on the other hand, there's sort of, well, I find myself fulfilled by poetry, and I see myself encountering all of these opportunities in this area, in these areas, but it's not quite clear that there is, let's say, as viable a career path or as clear-cut a career path as there is in another area. And those are certainly anxieties that I think every poet has got to work through if they really are focusing on it. But I think to your credit, early on in your writing career, you're already finding these opportunities, and it seems to me that you're on a path that, if you keep following on it, will certainly continue to open up. And you will find more opportunities. There are opportunities on this path. Are they enough to sustain a livelihood? Maybe. It's possible. I know poets who are doing it. I know poets or other writers and artists who, between fellowships and their own publications and appearances at colleges and universities and bookstore readings, and they hustle it out and they grind out a decent living. And then there's other poets who, like they don't want to hustle that hard, and so they work a day job, and poetry isn't even necessarily a hobby, but like publishing is a hobby. Publishing their poetry is a hobby, right? Where they're actually able to get it out and circulate it, but they do that with less of a focus because their kind of emphasis for their life is on, living this career or working the job that pays the bills, because they don't want to sacrifice all of their time over and lose that. Oh, the sense that it's special, right? The
Right.
sense that the poetry really gives you something special. And it sounds like it does that for you.
It does.
Can you close us out with a poem that you feel special about, or that kind of epitomizes that sense of what poetry does for you?
Would you mind if I read something from the word or the little, what is it called, open mic we had?
No, not at all. In fact, that was the piece that had kind of prompted me to contact you. So
I'm guessing you already know which one then, right?
I'm not sure that I can remember it offhand. I just know that I was impressed by it.
Let's see. Thoughts. If days can turn to nights, leaving blinding lights to fray, autumn leaves never turn shades, always basking in a breeze as it serenades watchful eyes. Pastures always green, full of life, a beauty to be seen, even to those bound by strife. Calming waters forever in clarity, such a rarity in its enthralling nature. If years can turn to days, leaving these tears in yearning bays, coves would engulf lonely hearts as they are left to discover troves of pearl, finding beauty. Mountain peaks will reach the heavens and ocean trenches down below, but to the grasping hand is nothing more. Twilight will encumber all that is sunshine and moonlight, but these sights will only see our somber eyes. If reaching arms can embrace, bringing grace to searching hearts, freezing winters never hinder tender words from glowing into blissful lips adorned. Rain would fall from the sky, shedding tears of joy, for days of pain would be long gone. Blowing airs will come and go, squandering faulty thoughts, and these doubts would be no more. If nights can turn to days, leaving rays to reunite, fire never scorched drifting arms, seeking someone to admire. Flowers bloomed all year round, leaving gazes to devour fields of pleasure. Eternal lights will glimmer hopeful thoughts as we dance in fertile grounds. If eternity was just one night, these blessed sights would become serenity. Crescent moon and stars would fill the sky, imbuing eyes with effervescence. Glooming eyes would ponder minds consuming lies. Darkness will settle in, these tortuous feelings left to meadow in insignificance. If souls could unify, bringing nine spoken words, these clasping hands would fill with joy. Sun and moon would devour each other, and in our reaching hour we will attune our souls becoming one. All the seasons of the earth would give reason to weather these storms, facing them together. Grasping hearts will transcend through time, these lasting moments bringing end to worried thoughts.
Did you find that, so it sounds to me like at various points in there, like the poem is addressed to someone other than the narrator of the poem.
Yeah,
I'm wondering,
it is.
okay, I guess I'm wondering whether you started that poem knowing that it was addressed to that person, or whether you discovered that the poem was addressed to that person while you were writing it.
No, I knew it throughout the whole time. It was what I was addressing it to. I was like thinking, or it was about, these worried thoughts that I try to bring with myself, with this person, and in hopes that one day I can get rid of them or something along the lines.
Sure. So, Eduardo, where can people find more of your work? How can they connect with you?
Well, I only have an Instagram page.
Okay.
At Eddie Michter.
Can you spell that for us?
Yeah, EDDYMICTER.
Can I ask what the significance of the handle is?
The Eddie Michter, right? It
Yeah.
was just a nickname given to me during middle school.
Huh.
Yeah, and they, I don't know, it just stuck because I use it as a gamer tag when I was
Okay.
on video games and social media too. So it's been stuck with me the
Uh,
whole time.
and how about the 209 poets? How can people get connected with what you're promoting coming out of the Stockton area? Coming out of the 209.
It would be through Instagram at 209 Poets. That's the only page. I think that's, yeah, it's the one I'm associated with.
Okay.
At 209 Poets.
What kind of open mic scene do you guys have going on out there? Is there like one open mic that's going on once a week, or is it like multiple sets that you can go to throughout the week?
So usually there's different places having open mics. You have the Terra Coffee Shop. You have the Hatch Workshop. And then sometimes it'd be some places, some event going on where they are holding an open mic. I usually frequent the Terra and then the Hatch Workshop. Those are my two go-to places. It's like maybe 2 times a month that I go and read poetry.
Okay.
I don't want to. I want to go to all of them, but I don't want to like, just throw a lot out in one day or like my poetry, what I've written. Because it is a process still for me to write. I mean, it doesn't
Sure.
take about like a day or a few days, around a week or two.
Each piece takes you
Not
about a
each
week or two,
piece. It's like,
like to get enough to read in a set at an open mic.
yeah, pretty much.
I got you. So you had mentioned before we started you're hoping at some point to pull together poems or to pull together a book of poems from what you're accumulating in your journal. How close to being done do you feel like you are with that before you start typing them up?
Well, I've typed everything that I've written so far. I'm halfway through my book. It'll probably take about another year before I do so then. But I don't. I'm trying to submit my work into one of those like, what is it called, presses?
Sure.
Because there are a few scholarships, I guess, that offer you a publication, and that's something that I also want to learn more about is like about publicating. You know, I guess I guess that's questions I have
Sure.
about that I need to learn more about. But once I'm done with this one holds about I think 300 pages.
And you're halfway
So
through it.
I'm halfway through it, yeah.
You got
Or
enough for a book already, bro.
yeah, I do.
You got enough for a book already. But I understand your method, right? I understand like, okay, I've got this distinct amount of pages that I want to fill up in the journal before I put together a book. And, maybe at that point the book becomes like, you select the best of, right? Or
Right.
something along those lines. But if you got 150 pages already filled up, I mean, you get, just to your credit, man, like you already got a book. So
Okay.
you got a wide range of pieces that you could read wherever you go. I'm going to encourage anybody who's listening who gets out to the Stockton, California area to shoot you a DM on Instagram and figure out where the open mic is going on that week so they can come check you out.
Okay.
And I hope to do so myself. Eduardo Claudio, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate your time, spending time with Paper Knives and letting us get to know you and your process a little bit better. We wish you a an early bon voyage to Ireland, and I hope to have you back on once you come back and we can hear some of that new work.
For sure, for sure. I'd have a lot more to share by then, I mean, I guess you do know, but even more so about my experiences. But thank you for having me here. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.